homelessness and housing. I'd like to do a webinar on it. And I said, let's go. And we promoted it on our website, and we've had a really good turnout of attendees and people signing up. So I'll just uh, exit stage right here and let Tara take it away along with her colleagues. Tara?
Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining us. And one of the reasons why I wanted to, talk about this particular subject is because, like all states, we've had ups and downs when it comes to, homelessness and how we deliver services, who's involved. We sometimes take 5 steps, 1 step back. But I think the things that we're doing in Utah are really starting to shape in a very good way. And we've had successes. And then in housing, we have, I would say, struggled to get housing on the map of our legislators. And I think, that is changing over I would say the last 5 years. It's been picking up momentum. And to have, Steve, join the governor's office when it comes to housing and policy is very important. And so we're going to start off with Tricia. And Tricia, if you want to introduce yourself and then let us hear what you're doing.
Thanks, Tara. And Steve, it's an honor to be here with you. I feel like our state homelessness coordinator, Wayne Niederhauser, should be here, but I am honored to be with all of you. I notice a lot of Utah people on the call today. And so hello, everybody who I know. So a lot of you know a lot of the things that are happening right now. But maybe you don't. So happy to talk about that. It's been an interesting kind of time that I've been doing this work. Um, oh, I should back up. I am the director of the Office of Homeless Services. So work very closely with Wayne on this work. Um, I've been in the office since 2017. So just in the time that I have been doing this work, we've seen a lot of things happen. And, Tara mentioned 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Sometimes it does feel that way. But I think we've been making a lot of progress. Maybe for those of you who are not in Utah, who don't really understand our structure around the coordination of homeless services, in 2004, Lloyd Pendleton was put into a position very similar to what Wayne's position is. And at that time, there was a really strong focus on housing first. And many of you probably know what that means, but I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what housing first is, which is really focusing on getting people into housing with wherever they're at, meeting them where they're at, and really having wraparound services and case management to support people in housing. I don't think our philosophy has changed, but that we are putting a greater emphasis on what might be needed before people go into housing. So whether that's substance use treatment, mental health treatment, different things like that. So what are the resources that people need? Let's get them into housing quickly as we can. I think there's also misconceptions and misunderstandings about kind of how many people are really experiencing homelessness in Utah every year. And there's a lot of focus on kind of a subpopulation, the people, individuals and families who need more intensive support. So going back to 2004, there was a strong emphasis on housing first and a strong emphasis, very concerted effort to create deeply affordable housing in response to homelessness. And at that time, the local homeless councils were also created in Utah. So we have 13 different local homeless councils throughout the state. And work is really coordinated on a local level, which is exciting. It takes kind of the COC model from HUD just a step further, where we have 3 COCs in Utah, but we've taken our largest COC and even broken it down into smaller coordinating areas. So that work really started in 2004, way before my time. And at that time, the State Homeless Coordinating Committee was the governing body that was chaired by the lieutenant governor. In the turning point really was in 2020, where the state homelessness coordinator position was created. Our office was taken out of housing and community development, and there was a bill passed that created a new, kind of changed the structure of the State Homeless Coordinating Committee to the Utah Homelessness Council. So that was all happening in 2021. And here we are just a few years later in 2024, and there was a bill that was passed this last legislative session that changed the makeup of that board again. And so that is a new board that we're working with that really took the council down to 11 people to be a more effective coordinating body. And there's a lot of good things about that. So finding ourselves here in 2024, I think what we're really focused on, we don't want to lose sight or the energy around deeply affordable housing. I want to say it was the 2023 legislative session, 2022 legislative session, and 2023 session. We had a lot of great success, in large part due to Wayne's position as the state homelessness coordinator and seeing what the needs were around deeply affordable housing in getting some ARPA federal funding for deeply affordable housing. That's 30% AMI or below, and some state funding as well. So our focus right now is really changing on what we need to address unsheltered homelessness and what we know the needs are throughout the state. But there's a large focus on what the needs are in Salt Lake County. We're currently in our winter overflow period, where every year for the last many, many years, actually, we have had to scramble, for lack of a better word, on finding additional emergency shelter beds. And not only in Salt Lake County, the work is happening in Weber County, Utah County, Davis County. I'm not naming them all, but don't want to miss anyone. Throughout the state, the work is happening to address the needs of individuals experiencing homelessness during the winter. Because of that need, and I'll talk a little bit about Salt Lake County, the need was identified for an additional 900 emergency shelter beds for the winter period in Salt Lake County. That's a lot to try to figure out in a very short period of time. And so we know now that we need to expand resources for emergency shelter. So that's our focus. I want to just set the record straight here with different news articles that have been published and radio interviews. We are not abandoning the scattered site model in Salt Lake County. That would be counteractive to actually what we need to do. We need to be expanding beds in Salt Lake County. And so the scattered site model, I also setting the record straight, it is working. And there are a lot of people that have been helped through emergency shelter through that model. We need additional beds, and that is the bottom line. So the immediate need around the coordination of an expanded campus site at this point is to have additional beds. And if we're going to have to identify that many emergency shelter beds, we want to make sure we're doing it right and looking at far into the future from now. So the goal with our new focus on emergency shelter is an immediate. We have some immediate needs that we're trying to meet, and we want to be thinking about 50 years from now. You'll hear what Wayne say that, so that we're not in this position again. The housing crisis does not seem to be going away anytime soon. And so we do need to be thinking about what we're doing around emergency shelter, unfortunately. Like I said, we don't want to lose sight of the focus on deeply affordable housing because we need the housing units on the other side of homelessness to really make an impact. So that's really, Tara, where our focus is right now. I might just mention a couple of other things if that's okay.
Oh, absolutely. And also, I was going to ask you about the strategic plan.
Oh, sure. Yeah, we do have a strategic plan that was adopted by the Utah Homeless Council. So that was the council that existed before this new Utah Homeless Services Board that just started work this year. That strategic plan is, we knew that that was a living document and it needs to be consistently reviewed and updated. The board has adopted, our new board has adopted some guiding principles that we'll be integrating into our existing strategic plan. And a lot of work was done around with that plan as far as, working with service providers throughout the state, identifying different needs throughout the state. And I think it's in a really good place because of all of the change. I think all of the change that is really kind of constantly happening on a policy level and with the board and then the committee and then the council and now the board, that slows things down. And so I think with this new board, we're excited to really dig into that strategic plan and start making some progress on it. Does that answer your question, Tara? Okay, great. I do want to just mention we're really focused on statewide family and youth homelessness. Those, two kind of subpopulations, I guess, for lack of a better term. We also see increasing, and that should be alarming to everyone. Youth homelessness, those are our kids that we want to make sure are on the right path for success in life. And so really a focus on youth homelessness and family homelessness in the same way. There are kids that are experiencing homelessness in those families, and we want to, work really hard to help families have better lives and change patterns. We're also don't want to lose sight of what's happening around domestic violence and homelessness related to domestic violence. That's maybe what I'll mention for now, Tara, and then we can continue to talk.
Thank you, Tricia. Steve, we would love you to talk about housing in Utah and some of the changes that are happening and really who are the people behind making those changes.
Thank you, Tara, and thank you, Tricia, for your report. You're doing great work. Yeah, the challenge with housing is that it impacts just about everything that we care about. Stable housing has a direct correlation to and causation, frankly, on education achievement, community volunteerism, crime, teen pregnancy, trying to think of the other things. I mean, homelessness, obviously, and educational achievement, and all of those things that we consider critical to sort of the mission success of our society are very, very directly impacted by housing stability. And housing stability is, can come in a number of forms. It can be rental, it can be ownership, different types of structures, but the most protected or the most sure way to have housing stability is to have home ownership. That's pretty clear. And our country historically over the last 100 years has been a 75% ownership country, and Utah's been about the same. Over the last few years, we've seen a big shift in the opportunity for young people to get into stable home ownership, stable housing. And the pandemic run up in pricing combined with back to normal interest rates has exposed a really dangerous flaw in our housing structure and in our financing structures. And we are seeing more and more people frozen out of the housing market. Prices are staying elevated, and with elevated pricing comes increased pressure. And we see more homelessness. I think last year, Tricia, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we had 5,000 plus new homeless individuals in Salt Lake County, which for Utah is a massive number. And there's a direct correlation between housing price and homelessness. And so when we look at housing, we really have to look at the entire spectrum of housing from the highest end of the market down to the most needy portion of our population, those who need deeply subsidized affordable housing. And so I'm going to just kind of work from the bottom up, if that's okay, Tara. One of the initiatives that Wayne Niederhauser and I have talked a lot about, and Tricia, I know he's talked to you a lot about this, is how do we prevent homelessness? Those are dimes spent to save dollars. And it's really challenging because as I've heard, no one gets elected for solving a problem before it's a crisis. So it's hard to get people to spend money on things that aren't crises yet. Unfortunately, now we do have a real crisis in housing. And I think it's getting the appropriate attention because it is impacting our kids and our grandkids. It impacts people up the income scale in a way that it never has before. And that's really creating a lot of momentum around how do we solve housing. And government has typically been deeply involved in affordable housing. And, the deeper you go on the affordability scale, the more government needs to be involved because we're socializing the costs of things that do not make money. If you want to make money and you just went out and built a for rent product and you did rents that people in the 30 to 50% AMI range could afford, you would never make money. You would lose a lot of money. And so the markets aren't going to deliver those solutions without significant government support. And so that's one area of focus is how do we increase our capacity in that space? How do we create more, more opportunity for people that are interested in doing market deals or that are willing to do below market deals? How do we entice them to do those deals? What are the resources that they have available? Can we do a better job in that space? And that's something that Wayne and I are collaborating on with Utah Housing Corporation. We've got an element of federal subsidy that really is critical to that, but equally critical are our state matching funds. That's typically where we fall short is in our state grant side because we're not set up like the federal government. We can't deficit spend. Just like normal people, you can't deficit spend. You don't go very far in deficit spending. Neither can our state. And so it's increasingly difficult as budgets get a little bit tighter to find more and more money for those deeply affordable housing solutions. But that is a focus. We have some state tax credits that I think were 6 years that are we're looking at those to see how they're performing. I think, they're working okay. We may want to tweak those and make them to see if we can make them even more efficient by combining them with some bonding or doing some things like that would create a little bit more bang for the buck on each dollar of tax credit in that transaction. you're not getting $1 of investment for $1 of tax credit. Usually you get about 60 cents or 65 cents on the dollar for every $1 of tax credit at the state level. The federal ones are much better because everyone has federal taxes they can offset, but the state tax piece is a little trickier simply because it's harder to sell those because there's not as much state tax liability. So that's something we're looking at closely, and how do we create more value in that space without necessarily going and asking for a whole lot more money. The easy answer is let's just go get a whole bunch more money. But the reality is, and I think we hear this every year, this is going to be a tough budget year. I'm pretty sure I haven't heard of a non-tough budget year ever. So this will be another one where we have to really work hard to find and prioritize those opportunities, because without that intervention, we will not have any success. We will not be able to increase our capacity on that lowest end of the income spectrum. And I think right now, if I remember right, the last statistics I saw was that we have somewhere between 1 and 3 units for every 100 people below 50% AMI. It's a really, really dire need, and obviously it leads to homelessness, it leads to suboptimal living situations, and the kids of those families are the ones that are most severely impacted because they don't have stability in their educational pursuits, and that is the biggest indicator of their future success. So that's really, kind of the focus, and we're using that. We owe this to our kids and grandkids. Will kind of become our new, I think, state tagline around housing, because there's a lot of resistance to, the influx we have from people from out of state. We get a lot of Californians moving here. We get people from the Northeast. We get people from the Northwest. But we are losing our population, our young population, to places where housing is more affordable. The Deep South, the Midwest. There's some really interesting charts showing our migration patterns in Utah, and we get an influx from those 3 or 4 locations, and we have an outflow to the South and the Midwest because housing is much more achievable there, and people can get started, get a job, buy a home, and live that that American dream. And so that's been a real focus, is how do we create that opportunity for our kids and grandkids, while respecting what always wins, which is the market. The market doesn't ever fail in the long run, but in short-term strategy, it needs some help. And right now we have what really is a broken housing market. Because of these external forces. We had inflation, price increases, and now back to normal interest rates. Incomes have not kept up with housing prices. There's some really interesting statistics around this. So for those keeping score at home, Utah is, by one measure, the 3rd most expensive housing state for housing in the country, right behind Hawaii, which is a runaway leader. Their ratio of homeowners of median housing cost to median wage is over 10. I think it's close to 11. California's next at 9-ish, 8.5 to 9. Utah is 3rd, and we are currently sitting at about 6.2, which means that you need 6.2 years of the median income to afford the median home. And our financial structures, everything that we built our system around, is based on a 3-to-1 ratio. And historically, if you go back to 1984, 90 to 95% of the country, you could find housing at or below 3-to-1. So for every year of income, times that by 3, that was the price of the median home. Now we've cut that in half essentially in Utah, and we don't have a very good remedy for that. It's really created a rise in the renter market. We've seen a lot of increased pressure in rentals. Rentals have gone up very quickly because it's hard for people to save when housing is that expensive, and we put more pressure on the rental market, which, as rents go up, again, when we talk about homelessness, rents go up, people drop out of the bottom. And that's just kind of how it goes. So in looking at solutions, we are, making sure that while we do keep our focus appropriately on that bottom segment, we also recognize that providing housing solutions up the ladder also provides for better results at the bottom end of the ladder as well. And so that's why we've been tremendously focused as governor's office on affordable starter homes. The governor set a goal of 35,000 starter homes over the next 4 years. That's a lot for Utah. We need to do some really hard work because we're not building those small starter homes. And the analogy for what is a starter home to me is go back to 1950. We had a lot of GIs coming home from the war. We needed a lot of housing in our country, millions of units, and we built them all over the country. And what we built were very small, not very exciting housing units, and they still exist today. They're 1,000 to 1,400 square feet. Some of them have an unfinished basement. Some have a basement that's now been finished. Many of them didn't have a garage. Some had a garage added on later. Some built a standalone garage in the back. That was what was considered a starter home back when we had the last sort of real dire need for starter homes. And now a starter home is considered one where you're over 2,000 square feet. I think Utah, the average home size is 2,800 square feet. We're also #1 in the nation on that scale. And our appetites have grown beyond what we can afford. And so our push is to develop and help incentivize developers and builders to build smaller things on smaller lots, just like we did back then. When I speak in groups, and if I could see all your hands, I would ask, who here grew up in a home smaller than 1,500 square feet? And about 75% of you would raise your hands. And you turned out okay. You didn't suffer for having to share a bedroom with a sibling. And we've gotten away from sort of that ethos, and we have to bring that opportunity back. And really it's driven by, economics. Someone who's starting out, I know when I was starting out, I couldn't afford a 3,000 square foot home. We bought a 960 square foot home in Spokane, Washington, and 2 bedrooms and 1.5 baths. And we were happy as clams. We thought we'd, done really well. It was $108,000 or $106,000. And now that type of home is not viewed as an acceptable starter home in our building community. Our appetites have grown. And so, that's created this crisis where all we're building are smaller or are larger homes. Even on smaller lots, we're building larger homes. And so our focus is on helping to create that initial entry opportunity for first-time home buyers. We have a $20,000 state grant for first-time home buyers. There's some limitations on it. It has to be a newly constructed home for sale for less than $450,000. And then first-time home buyers can get a $20,000 0% interest, an interest-free loan that sits as a silent second on that property, and it can be used for down payment assistance, closing costs, fees, any of the above. And we've done about 12 or 1,300 of those to this point in our state. And we've got about money for about another 1,200 or 1,300 more, or we have to think about and look at whether that program's working. One of the other tools that we've created over the last year, really to help with the Starter Homes Initiative, is what we call the HB 572 funding model. What we found is a lot of our smaller builders were not able to get affordable financing on projects. After the last recession, we saw a lot of small builders go out of business. And that has persisted through today, and a big chunk of our production in Utah is these smaller builders. About 60% traditionally is by non-national builders or not even non-regional builders. And these builders have been squeezed by the financial markets with rising interest rates, and they're unable to get affordable financing for their projects. So we set aside $300 million in the state's Public Treasures Investment Fund for home builders who are committed to building what we call a qualified project to be able to access financing at significantly below market rates. And what they have to do is they have to work with the municipality that they're building in and get approval for an HB 572 project. And what that means is that of what they obtain this financing for, 60% has to be owner occupied with a deed restriction for owner occupancy, so it can't be rental. And it has to sell for under $450,000. And we've targeted $400,000. We're trying to push that number downward. And if they do that, then they can access financing for their project at what today is about a 6.2% rate. And that gives them, the ability to save some money in their financing, because they're not going to make as much of a margin on these smaller homes as they are on the larger homes that they otherwise could build. But it also provides liquidity into the lender markets for them to be able to make these loans to these smaller builder developers who don't have internal financing. I won't go into the financial crisis issues from last year with bank closures, but that's driven a lot of the issues around our smaller builders and the lack of drop in housing production that we've seen. Right now, we're building about half of the units that we need to on an annual basis. We need to pick that up significantly because Utah is going to continue to grow very rapidly. We're looking at an influx in population that is unmatched in our state's history, and we have to be prepared for that, or we'll see continued pressure on pricing, continued pressure on rentals, and we'll also see continued flight out of Utah by our young generations who go to where housing is affordable. We do get some of them back. About a quarter of the people that move into Utah every year are boomerangers. They're coming back home, but we lose a lot. And that impacts our culture. That impacts our, one of the things we cherish most, which is family connectedness and proximity. People would choose to stay here if they could, but they aren't able to make that choice right now because of the lack of affordable housing. So that was a lot, Tara. I just ran through a whole bunch of stuff, but I'll shut up.
I do have a question.
Yes.
So one of the things that I think has been extremely successful is making sure that we have had the right people around the table. And I'm talking about the Commission on Housing Affordability. I'm wondering if you could just take a few minutes to talk about the work that has been happening there.
Yeah, you bet. And Tara's been a critical piece of that commission. Several years ago, I can't remember when it started, maybe 6-8 years ago, the legislature created what we call the Commission on Housing Affordability. And the intent there was to try to look at, structures, state structures. What are we doing? What could we be doing better? It was intended to be an inclusive body with voices from the largest developers down to the smallest nonprofit service providers. And it's been a really positive force for creating hard conversations, opportunities, I would say, for hard conversations, because it puts people in the same room, puts people in the same space, and they have to tackle hard issues together. And not everything gets solved, but every year we come out with a bill from that commission that really targets very specific areas of needed improvement in land use reform, in building code reform, in getting rid of stupid regulations, in providing additional resources for homelessness and low-income housing. And it is staffed by legislative staff and by the Department of Workforce Services, which manages a lot of the grant funding. And it's been really, really positive. This year, I think we had 4 different subgroups operating out of the Commission on Housing Affordability, tackling everything from low-income housing, rental provisions and what we can do better for rental protections, to condo development issues, condo financing, and how we can encourage the ability to build more condos. We've looked at how do we reinvest in our legacy cities, where we have older neighborhoods that are falling downward in kind of a downward spiral, where we're having a lot of move outs from our legacy cities. We're closing schools, we're losing congregations, we're losing vibrancy in those neighborhoods, and we want to stem that tide. So that's been one of the other issues that we've tackled and look to have some legislation on this year. But it really does produce legislation rather than just a lot of talk. The goal of that commission is to produce at least 2 bills a year that are the housing bills for the legislature to continue. How'd I do, Tara?
You did great. Thank you so much. I just think it's important for people to know that that commission exists and that it was intentional for the membership to be, I guess you would say, prescribed as it is now. I mean, I think the League of City and Towns has been a really big influence and having those hard conversations with their members. And I would suggest to anybody who is not in Utah to kind of look at that commission because it has been very effective. So Tricia, I'm wondering if you could share with us one of your, I guess, golden moments or something you really are proud that your office has been successful doing.
Oh, that's a good question, Tara. The first thing that comes to my mind is, we're looking at different solutions, right? We need to have a variety of solutions for homelessness, outside of just congregate shelter. If we're really going to be able to engage with people and start to help with case management and what some of the needs are, we need a variety of solutions. We had a pilot project that was here in Salt Lake City that is a micro shelter pilot project that started last year. And we recently moved that pilot project from city property to state UDOT property. It's 50 micro shelter units. And the goal, like I said, really was to start to engage with people who might not be entering into congregate shelter. And that project, I think, has been wildly successful. I would love to see more of them throughout the state, just to offer an alternative and again, like a place and a space to start engaging with people who might not be accessing other services.
Great, thank you. So we have some questions, and so I'm just going to read them, and either one of you, if you would like to answer. The first one is, how do you think the new administration will affect funding for homeless services and home ownership programs?
Trish, how do you feel? There's some mixed emotions there.
Yeah.
The thing that a lot of people feel positively about is that because the new president is in the real estate game and that he has a lot of friends that are in the real estate game that are making money on some of these programs, that maybe he'll get some pressure from friendly sources to continue these programs and not make drastic cuts, which I think is the big fear.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect answer, Steve. I think there is a lot of uncertainty, and it's, administration changes are always, you're just you're never quite sure what's going to happen. And I think with homelessness, we're in a let's wait and see. There have been some comments from the new administration around homelessness and wanting to make sure that cities are clean and have funding to have different resources. So those I'm thinking about those positively, and we'll just have to see what happens.
Thank you. So, next question. If the tagline is only focused on supporting our children and future generations, this will have an impact on our older adults who are increasingly priced out of housing. I would hate to see us continue to pit generations against one another.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair comment. And, this is kind of the same thing. We get a lot of, feedback on 35,000 starter homes. What about everything else? Don't we need everything else? And in the world we currently live in, where, everything is a tweet, and if you have more than 130 characters in your policy, you're not going to get it out anywhere. That's been sort of the marketing piece, because that resonates with most people, and it really directly attacks the biggest issue that we have in providing housing, which is NIMBY issues across the state, and I know they're the same across the country. And so the most effective thing that the marketing research has shown is that tying our need to build housing and to have more housing, against the wishes of some communities that are saying, I like things the way that they are. The only thing that they respond to is, well, where are your kids and grandkids going to live? Or do you want to send them away? And so that's the reason for that. It's really not to pit generations against each other. I think, in fact, we have a strategy coming out around senior housing as well, because that's a significant, we're seeing, and Trish probably talked about it, we're seeing senior homelessness in a way that we've never seen it before. I mean, it's tragic what we're seeing, and that's just a reflection of rents continuing to rise. People are just literally dropping out of the bottom of the bucket.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. And I appreciate that response, Steve, because I think it's true. We need to be focusing on everything. And I don't think that the state has lost sight of every kind of thinking about every generation that needs help, right? In 2020, 3,945 seniors, that the way that we classify that for this data point, were experiencing homelessness, seniors over 55. And in 2021, that rose to 4,193. In 22, it rose to 4,812. And in 2023, it rose to 5,009. I don't have the 2024 data in front of me, but looking at that trend, I would be willing to bet that it's increased again. And so it is something that we think a lot about in our office, is senior homelessness and what the resources are for those seniors. Looking at what Social Security, the average Social Security payment is $967 a month. I'm not sure about you, but my daughter that's 24 can't find rent for that amount, right? And so yeah, we're thinking about it a lot. I know Steve mentioned how from a housing perspective that is being contemplated and discussed. So
I have a question. I just thought about this as Tricia was talking. So are we looking, I mean, especially with seniors that are isolated by themselves, living in a home, are we looking at any programs that would do shared housing for that population?
I'm not aware of any specific programs. I know that's something that a lot of the nonprofit community, and in fact, I think that was mentioned a few times, Tara, at our last housing coalition conference. I heard a few people talking about that not only for seniors, but also for younger people and single moms is a really big issue now. That, you know, they have real housing challenges, and maybe shared housing is one of the approaches that could help them. But yeah, it's an issue that I'm aware people are talking about it. I don't think we have any strategies around that. So as we develop our statewide housing plan, that would be a really critical thing to include.
Okay. Another question. Can you talk a bit about Utah's approach to condo construction and construction defects litigation?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that we have been beating our heads against, at least I have, for the last year and prior to that in the legislature. So the issue is that in every other state, I think, in the country, other than Utah, I don't think anybody has the same statutory structure that we have, where you have a long period of time to sue for construction defects liability, and a third party can come in and file a lawsuit on behalf of an HOA. And that has given rise to massive litigation factories. We have some, you know, law firms that go into large condo developments, and they buy a condo and they strip it down and measure everything and find every defect. And then they'll file a class action suit essentially on behalf of the condo association and all the owners, and results in, you know, massive damages. And frankly, most of these issues are not, well, they're not life safety issues. You know, it's things like, well, this doorway is a 1/4 inch too narrow. And, you know, that's the problem that's come out of that. These aren't really consumer advocacy issues. They're more money-making opportunities as they've kind of come out. So Utah a few years ago passed some legislation that said that you can't sue on behalf of others. If you want to file a lawsuit, you have to be the one that has a contract with the developer. And so that's essentially thwarted those lawsuits in Utah. However, the insurance industry has not responded with Utah-specific policies. We are not going to lead the nation in changing policy around, you know, our housing policy. We ride, you know, on the back seat. And so as we've talked to insurers and said, hey, could you write a specific policy for Utah, recognizing this reality? And they all just say no. And we say, well, what if we make you? And they say, great, we'll leave the state. And we've seen insurance companies leaving California, Florida, and Utah over the last few years, Colorado as well. So that is the big problem. And so insurance to build a condo is over 3 times that of required to build an apartment of exactly the same construction, just because of those liability issues. So we've seen a huge rise in apartment production and a significant drop nationwide in condo production. And the only condos being built are really, really expensive condos. So what we are proposing this year is a state-backed insurance product that recognizes the reality of Utah's statutory structure. Meaning we're going to provide a state, and we're working on the mechanism for that, but we're looking at providing a state insurance product that allows for developers to buy that insurance policy from the state. We will insure against those issues that frankly can't be brought, and then they can get their normal insurance and all the things that can be brought. And so that will drop the one of the big barriers to condo construction is that liability structure. And so we're going to answer that from a state standpoint. No one's going to come and ride to our rescue and solve this problem for us. We have to solve it ourselves. We're essentially right now the healthy patient in a room of 50 sick people, and we're paying the same premium that they are, even though we're healthy and they're sick. And so we're paying for other states' policies right now that we don't have. In addition to that, we're looking at the implementation of a condo financing structure similar to what the feds have going on what's called the 221D4 program, where HUD has been doing this for 90 years. They've been building affordable rental units across the country. They provide the financing in exchange for fixed rates on the rentals. And affordable housing, the developer doesn't have any incentive to raise the price. There's some high barriers to developer entry into this program, so quality is carefully monitored on the front end and the back end. So we're looking at creating a mirror image of that program, but for condo development in the state. And that would enable us to be able to develop condos for a specific price point at significantly lower than market rates. And do that and drop that entry point for home ownership down, especially in some of our legacy cities, areas where we have infill parcels that right now are not getting built on, or if they're getting built on, they're doing small for rent product. We want to change that to have them building larger ownership product and create opportunities where we can structure. You'll have a tranche of condos that are for sale at this price point. You'll have some here, you'll have some here, you'll have some here, you'll have some here. So we can create mixed income communities in these condo associations and provide opportunity throughout the income scale. So great question. It's something that we've been beating our heads against, and I think we've got a path now to create an opportunity in Utah that, again, this is a problem across the country. No one's been able to crack this nut. So we're going to take our shot at it this year.
Great, thanks. Trish, I have a question for you. So, and some people may not know what this means, so if you could give a meaning for it, but how is your office involved in combating the NIMBYism coming with Code Blue?
That's a great question. NIMBY is not in my backyard, for those of you who don't know, but
no, Code Blue.
Well, what is Code Blue? Okay, I see, Tara. Code Blue it was created in law in the legislative session 2023. And it is really, I'm going to just summarize it like as simply as possible. When the temperatures drop below 18 degrees, that every county is required to have a Code Blue response for those days in their county where a Code Blue is called by the National Weather Service. It is to keep people alive, is what that is. We work very closely with the local homeless councils in their strategies around identifying sites. So I think part of the question was, is that like the local responsibility? How is the state helping with that? Wayne has attended, I have attended a lot of the Code Blue meetings that are happening around the state, particularly along the Wasatch Front. There's been quite a bit of coordination that's needed to happen because counties of the second class are required to have a winter response. Counties of the first and second class. So we've done a lot of work in Utah County, Davis County, Weber County, and Salt Lake County. I feel like I'm missing one, but that's okay. Don't mean to leave anybody out. From a local perspective, I think with the Code Blue, because it's a requirement of the counties to come up with that plan, a lot of that kind of public input and feedback, the process for combating the NIMBYism is done on a local level, but we really play a supportive role in that. I don't know. The fact of the matter with this stuff is that homelessness makes people nervous. And that is because, you go driving around downtown areas, whether that's, any of our kind of more major cities, that more visible homelessness is what people think of when they think about homelessness, which, to Steve's point about first-time homelessness, that's not necessarily who we are talking about when we're talking about really strategies to help keep people alive during the winter. Steve, just so you've got the stat, you were right on that with the 5,000 in Salt Lake County. It's about 10,000 people statewide, 9,800 that experienced homelessness for the first time. we have a lot of work to do around education on homelessness and acknowledge that and are coming up with plans for that. Because, you know, people who aren't accessing emergency shelter in the middle of winter on a very cold night, there are reasons. I've talked to people when I've done the point in time count in Davis County who are experiencing homelessness that are simply nervous about going into a congregate setting. I often say, if you found yourself homeless, if you can get your head into that spot, I know for myself, I would not go into a congregate shelter. I would stay in my car, probably for as long as I could if I had a car, and I would probably camp, knowing myself. So, a lot of public education to do, and we're working on that.
Well, thank you so much. I think there's a few other questions, and we will try to get those answered by addressing them, typing in. But I want to thank you so much for, sharing your experiences. And, I just think that we are on to doing some really good stuff. And we just need to continue to push forward. And I really appreciate the work that you both have done. And also Wayne, referred to Wayne Niederhauser. He used to be the president of the Senate, and he's now the governor's choice for being over homelessness. And it has been eye-opening for him and a big learning experience that I think he is probably shocked to know. But he's doing some really great stuff. And Tricia, I have to, thank you for, guiding him. So thank you for both your work, and we will see you another time.
Yeah,
And
thank
Greg,
you from NCRC. We appreciate all the work that Tara does when it comes to our coalition in the Southwest, Mountain West, and Southwest. We have our spring conference coming up in 2025, March 25th, 27th in Washington, D.C. We encourage you to check out our website at ncrc.org. But I really applaud all the work that you all are doing in Utah. There's the surrounding states in the coalition are facing homelessness challenges as well. And being able to share your case studies and expertise and what you all are doing in your strategies is really, really helpful, as well as other folks that are following it from around the country. So I can't thank you enough. So I really appreciate your time, Tara, and Tricia and Steve. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
thank
Thanks
you.
for hosting us.
Oh, and we'll make this available and social media, and we're going to share the link.
Terrific.
Thank you.
So much. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Tara. Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Tara. Thanks, Greg. Good to meet you. Bye-bye.